right, so Senator Chuck Schumer from New York gave a speech last week about Israel and Netanyahu in particular, and it got a lot of attention from the blogosphere, I guess, and the media in general. People like Thomas Friedman called it courageous. Peter Beinart, ex-liberal Zionist, I guess, might call him, called it a big deal and quite remarkable. New York Times called it scathing. So it seems that people are referring to this and thinking of it as some kind of very progressive, maybe even leftist screed takedown of Netanyahu or something like that. And it's like a real big shift. It's amazing that Schumer would give such a scathing, lefty, anti-Israel, anti-Netanyahu speech. That's nonsense. Let's take a look at the speech.
I speak for myself, but I also speak for so many mainstream Jewish Americans.
I consider myself a mainstream U.S. Jewish American, and you certainly do not speak for me.
A silent majority whose nuanced views on the matter have never been well represented in this country's discussions about the war in Gaza.
The views that have never been well represented in this country on this issue, namely Palestine, are not your constituency, the people that you think you're talking to, Mr. Schumer. It's actually anti-Zionists who truly, strongly criticize Israel, as opposed to your tepid, faux, progressive type of criticism.
We love Israel in our bones. What Israel has meant to my generation, within living memory of the Holocaust, is impossible to measure. The flowering of the Jewish people in the desert, from the ashes of the Holocaust.
That is scathing. Scathing takedown of Netanyahu and Israel. Scathing. Oh, what did he say? Oh, yeah, don't never pass up an opportunity to bring up the Holocaust when criticizing Palestine.
If the events of the last few months have made anything clear, it is that Israel is surrounded by vicious enemies, and there are many people around the world who excuse and even support their aims to expel and kill Jews living in their hard-won land of refuge.
Damn, he's really sticking it to Netanyahu there. That is courageous.
After 5 months of suffering on both sides of this conflict.
And there it is, the courageous and scathing both sidesism of Chuck Schumer. How could Netanyahu survive such criticism?
But first, let's not forget how we arrived at this critical moment. What Hamas did on October 7th was brutal beyond imagination.
Yes, Senator Schumer, don't forget to remind everyone that history started on October 7th.
I have seen the footage and heard the stories of innocents murdered and raped.
And also don't forget to repeat the debunked rape charges, because we know that works very well to convince people to support the war. So just keep repeating it. Doesn't really matter if there's been no actual evidence of those claims. If you just keep repeating it, it'll help the war effort. Scathing.
This pure and premeditated evil. Many of my family members were killed by Nazis in the Holocaust. October 7th.
Yes, if there's some way for you to equate October 7th and Hamas with the Holocaust and Palestinians with the killing of millions of Jews, please get that into the speech, because that will be a really serious takedown of Netanyahu.
Their goal on October 7th was to provoke a tough response from Israel by killing as many Jews as possible in the most vicious manner possible, raping women, executing babies.
Yes, excellent work, Mr. Schumer. Just keep repeating those rape claims and the killings of babies that Biden referenced, having seen the pictures of and then had to walk back. Just keep saying it, because it's very courageous, and it's just the best way to convince the U.S. public of the horrible nature of Netanyahu.
It bothers me deeply that most media outlets covering this war and many protesters opposing it have placed the blame for civilian casualties entirely on Israel. All too often in the media and at protests, it is never noted that Hamas has gone to great lengths to make themselves inseparable from the civilian population of Gaza.
Yeah, it's shameful that these protesters are blaming Israel for the death of so many Palestinian civilians, like 30,000 civilians. Just because they're dropping bombs on all the hospitals and the IDF is disallowing food and aid to get in to the starving population. Million plus people are starving. And all of the universities are being bombed, hospitals, and the government of Israel is telling the population to move to certain areas because it'll be safe, and then they bomb there. Why? That doesn't really mean that you should blame. Oh. And also that the media, it's crazy that they never mention that Hamas is embedding themselves in the civilian population so that Israel has no choice but to massacre large amounts of civilians. Oh, that's right. Mainstream outlets tell that narrative incessantly.
The only real and sustainable solution to this decades-old conflict is a negotiated two-state solution, a demilitarized Palestinian state living side by side with Israel in equal measures of peace, security, prosperity, dignity, and mutual recognition.
Oh man, Schumer, that is courageous. The way he's talking about the way forward being the two-state solution, that is just breaking new ground. I mean, I've never heard any U.S. senator or president or any administration be talking like that. That is some brave shit.
But for a two-state solution to work over the long term, it has to include real and meaningful compromises by both sides.
100% both sides, because we're all aware that culpability and responsibility of this horrific situation is split equally. It's both sides.
For example, too many Israelis who say they want a two-state solution don't acknowledge how the amount and extent of expanding settlements renders that a virtual impossibility.
Wow. He's even saying that the expansion of settlements is an obstacle to peace. That is amazing. This is truly historic.
And too many Palestinians who say they want a two-state solution don't acknowledge how their insistence on an unequivocal right of return is a fatal impediment to progress.
Yeah, that right of return nonsense, which is, written into international law or something like that. That's just terrible. Yeah, come on.
As a result, they reject a two-state solution in favor of one state where Palestinians and Israelis would supposedly live in democratic peace side by side. I count at least two reasons why this wouldn't work and why it is unacceptable to most Jewish people.
A democratic form of government, equal rights for everyone, one person, one vote, general liberal values, a constitution, defined borders. I'm actually pretty cool with that. I guess I'm in the majority of the Jews here in the United States. But yeah, Schumer, spitting truth.
First, this combined state could take an extreme turn politically, putting Jewish Israelis in peril. This state would be a majority Palestinian.
Majority Palestinian. Oh, that is terrifying. More Palestinians than Jews. That's horrific. Who could possibly put up with that?
But in this hypothetical single state, democracy could cost Israeli Jews their safety.
Democracy could cost Jews their safety. Democracy could cost Jews their safety.
Second, and even more important, the Jewish people have a right to their own state.
Not if it means forced transfer of hundreds of thousands or millions of other people and slaughtering them to be able to obtain it. There's no right for that.
They say the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result.
Yes, they do say that that's the definition of insanity. Kind of like listening to your rhetoric over and over and over and over, decade after decade after decade, from politician after politician after president after senator, and thinking that it means something different than your complete and total lockstep support of anything Israel wants.
I appreciate that so many Israelis cannot contemplate the possibility of two states right now because they remain so traumatized and so angry by what Hamas did on October 7th. The brutality, the viciousness, the sexual assault, the imprisonment.
Excellent work, Mr. Schumer. Just keep pounding home that rape charge. Keep talking about the sexual assault charges that have been debunked. It's excellent, excellent war propaganda. Just keep saying it.
We'll never forget what happened on October 7th.
Yes, use the term never forget. Equate October 7th with the Holocaust and keep repeating October 7th as if that's the beginning of history.
The fourth major obstacle to peace is Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who has all too frequently bowed to the demands of extremists like Ministers Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and the settlers in the West Bank.
Netanyahu is not bowing to the demands of these extremists. He is one of them. He has been for many decades, and Schumer knows this. Schumer is lying through his teeth.
While we have vehemently disagreed on many occasions, I will always respect his extraordinary bravery for Israel on the battlefield as a younger man.
Did you hear that? Schumer said that he vehemently disagreed with Netanyahu. That is scathing. That is courageous. That's a big deal. He disagrees with him. Wow. How can he get up and talk like that in Congress? It's amazing. Bravery.
As a lifelong supporter of Israel, it has become clear to me the Netanyahu coalition no longer fits the needs of Israel after October 7th. And the Israeli people are being stifled right now by a governing vision that is stuck in the past.
The Israeli people are being stifled by their government, and Netanyahu, he's just ignoring what they want. Oh, wait a minute. No, he's doing exactly what they want.
Hamas, radical right-wing Israelis in government and society, President Abbas, Prime Minister Netanyahu. These are the four obstacles to peace.
The four obstacles to peace. What do these four obstacles to peace have in common? They're all outgrowths and emanate from Israel.
On the Israeli side, the U.S. government should demand that Israel conduct itself with a future two-state solution in mind.
More scathing rhetoric from Schumer demanding that Israel conduct itself with a two-state solution in mind. That is, again, that's incredible thing to say coming from a U.S. senator. Wild. It's wild.
We should not be forced into a position of unequivocally supporting the actions of an Israeli government that include bigots who reject the idea of a Palestinian state.
No, Chuck, you're not forced into that. You waltz into it willingly and have done so your entire life, seemingly.
Israel is a democracy.
Yeah, no, it's not. And you know it.
At this critical juncture, I believe a new election is the only way to allow for a healthy and open decision-making process about the future of Israel.
Are you telling another country how to run their political system, telling them that they need to have new elections. Is that your place? That's interesting.
Of course, the United States cannot dictate the outcome of an election, nor should we try.
The United States cannot dictate the outcome of an election. That's a good one.
There needs to be a fresh debate about the future of Israel after October 7th.
Hammer it home, baby. October 7th, that's the beginning of history. October 7th, that's when everything started. October 7th.
Before October 7th, things were moving in the right direction.
Yeah, no, they weren't.
Now is the time for courageous leadership. After Israelis and Palestinians have experienced so much horror and loss of life.
Yes, both sides have experienced horrific loss. It's terrible. But let's remember that it's equal.
My heart also breaks at the loss of so many civilian lives in Gaza. I'm anguished that the Israeli war campaign has killed so many innocent Palestinians. I know that my fellow Jewish Americans feel the same anguish when they see the images of dead and starving children and destroyed homes. Gaza is experiencing a humanitarian catastrophe. Entire families wiped out, whole neighborhoods reduced to rubble, mass displacement, children suffering. We should not let the complexities of this conflict stop us from stating the plain truth. Palestinian civilians do not deserve to suffer for the sins of Hamas, and Israel has a moral obligation to do better. The United States has an obligation to do better. I believe the United States must provide robust humanitarian aid to Gaza and pressure the Israelis to let more of it get through to the people who need it. Jewish people throughout the centuries have empathized with those who are suffering and who are oppressed because we have known so much of that ourselves. As the Torah teaches us, every human life is precious. Every single innocent life lost, whether Israeli or Palestinian, is a tragedy, as the scripture says, quote, destroys an entire world. What horrifies so many Jews especially is our sense that Israel is falling short of upholding these distinctly Jewish values that we hold so dear. We must be better than our enemies, lest we become them. The second major obstacle to peace is radical right-wing Israelis in government and society. The worst example of this radicalism are Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich and Ministry of National Security Itamar Ben-Gvir. Minister Smotrich has in the past openly called for the subjugation and forced displacement of all Palestinians in the West Bank. In the current crisis, he has used inflammatory rhetoric and called for punitive restrictions on Palestinian farmers in the West Bank during the olive harvest. And he has opposed the provision of any humanitarian assistance to Gaza, going so far as to stop agreed-upon shipments of flour. Minister Ben-Gvir is no better. When he was a young man, he was barred from the Israeli military service for his extremist views. Last year, in a move only intended to antagonize the Muslim population, he visited the Temple Mount with his supporters as a brazen show of force towards Palestinians. And during this current conflict, he has facilitated the mass distribution of guns to far-right settlers, exacerbating instability, fueling violence. There's a nastiness to what Ministers Smotrich and Ben-Gvir believe and how they use their positions of authority and influence, an eagerness to inflame and provoke, that is profoundly irresponsible and self-destructive. Ministers Smotrich and Ben-Gvir may not say they want to kill all Palestinians outright, but they are clear in their desire to displace them from their homes and replace them with Israeli settlers. This is also abhorrent.
Those last 3 minutes from Schumer are reasonable remarks. And I guess that's what media pundits and certain politicians in the blogosphere and the New York Times and Peter Beinart and Thomas Friedman. This is what they were referring to, I guess, as so scathing and courageous and such a big deal coming from Schumer. But it's just 3 minutes. This was a 45-minute speech. I cut a lot of stuff out because it was 45 minutes. If I was going to respond to actually everything, this already long and probably boring and stupid video would be much longer. But I wanted to leave in those 3 minutes because they were reasonable, decent remarks. But it's such a small percentage of all of his talking points that calling this some kind of scathing indictment of Israel and Netanyahu is just, it's mindless. Aside from all of the stuff that he's saying being so repetitive and having been said by hundreds of US politicians over the decades, there's nothing new here. It's way too rose-colored glasses, kind of not real optimism. It's just kind of optimism for optimism's sake to take this speech as some kind of step forward in our government's attitude toward Netanyahu or Israel. It's not. This is nothing new. This is not courageous. It's not a big deal. And saying so makes things worse.